All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking about Roman gladiators,
Yes.
and we got a ton of listener questions and articles and books, all sorts of stuff that you all have sent in.
Yeah, lots of great material.
And so we're going to try to do our best to go through all this and take a look at this topic.
Absolutely.
Now, when we talk about Roman gladiators, a lot of
Mhm.
times I think what comes to mind is, the Hollywood version,
Right,
the
yes.
the big, kind of brutal blood sport.
The spectacle.
Yeah, the spectacle of it all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so enduringly fascinating to people,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I think too, when we see it in film and TV,
Uh-huh.
um, a lot of times it is portrayed as just this purely brutal
Right.
kind of thing.
Just bloodthirsty
Yeah.
and, no skill, no nuance.
Right. And so hopefully we can kind of peel back some of those layers and see what the real story is.
Absolutely. And I think you'll find it's much more than just this sort of mindless violence.
Yeah, I think that's what I love about these deep dives is we get to kind of go, past that initial
Yeah.
impression and really uncover some cool things.
Yeah, peel back those layers and see the complexities, the
Exactly.
nuances.
Yeah, so where do we even begin? Like, where does this whole idea of gladiatorial combat come from?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because it's not something the Romans just invented out of whole cloth, right?
Right.
There are actually much deeper roots to it
Okay.
that go back to ancient Etruscan practices and even, influences from the Greeks.
Wow.
And so, some of the early forms of gladiatorial combat were actually linked to things like funerary rites.
Okay.
So a way of honoring the dead
Right.
through ritualized combat.
That's so different from what I guess what I picture in my mind.
Right.
It's so different to picture like a funerary rite versus like, the big Colosseum.
Right. And I think that's what's so fascinating about it is how much it changed
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
time. So you had this kind of evolution,
Yeah.
over centuries from these very somber ritualistic combats
Yeah.
to something that became much more of a public spectacle.
Right.
And that was driven by all sorts of things, political ambition, economic incentives,
Right.
this growing appetite for entertainment among
yeah.
the Roman populace.
Yeah. So how did we get there? Like, how did we go from this kind of, ancient ritualistic thing to,
Yeah.
the big Caesar, putting on these huge shows?
Well, I think you hit on a key point there, which is Caesar.
Yeah.
Because Caesar really understood the power of spectacle, right?
Yeah.
How to captivate the masses, and he saw how these gladiatorial games could be used to
Yeah.
enhance his own political standing.
So this is a guy who clearly understands like marketing.
Oh, absolutely. Way ahead of his time.
Yeah, like way before, Madison Avenue and all that.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years before.
So what kinds of things was he doing? Was he changing up the games in a certain way, or was he just making them bigger and better?
I mean, it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
I mean, he certainly made them bigger and more lavish.
Right.
He increased the number of gladiators fighting.
Wow.
He even introduced exotic animals into the mix. So it was all about creating a buzz,
Okay.
generating excitement,
Yeah.
really positioning himself as this generous benefactor
Uh,
who's providing these grand spectacles for the enjoyment of the people.
so he really understood how to play to the public.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like a true politician.
A master of public image,
Right.
and he was able to manipulate that to his advantage.
So you've got this kind of perfect storm.
Mhm.
Then you've got this ancient ritual. You've got Caesar coming in and making it this big public spectacle.
Right.
But it's also a business, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is a whole industry that springs up around this.
Absolutely.
So how does that work?
Yeah, so gladiatorial combat became this complex and lucrative business
Okay.
with its own rules, training facilities, financial structures. I
Okay.
mean, there were trainers, managers, promoters, even talent scouts.
Wait a minute. Talent scouts. Like they're going out and finding people to be gladiators.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking for potential stars, people with the right physique, the right temperament.
Huh, so this is like the ancient Roman equivalent of like a sports agent or something.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And at the center of this whole system was the lanista.
The lanista. Okay, I've heard that term before, but what exactly did they do?
So the lanista was kind of the central figure
Okay.
in this whole business. I mean, they were like a combination of coach manager
Uh-huh.
and shrewd businessman all rolled into one.
So they were the ones who were like, in charge of recruiting and training the gladiators.
Exactly. They were responsible for finding them,
Wow.
training them,
Oh,
providing for their upkeep, their food, their lodging,
and even negotiating their contracts for the fights.
So, like, they were really the ones shaping the careers of these gladiators.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, a skilled gladiator was a valuable asset to a lanista.
Yeah.
They could bring in a lot of money through their victories.
So it's like you said before, these gladiators weren't just like disposable pawns. They were investments.
Exactly. They were investments. And the lanista had a vested interest in making sure they were well taken care of, that they were properly trained,
That makes a lot of sense.
and that they survived the fights.
Yeah. Because if they died, then they're not making any more money.
Exactly.
So this really kind of changes the picture from what we often see in, the movies and stuff.
Right.
It's not just this, bloodthirsty free-for-all. There's actually a lot more going on behind the scenes.
There's a whole system in place, a whole economy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, we talked about the origins of gladiatorial combat and kind of the business side of things.
Yeah.
But what about the actual fighting itself? Like, were there different types of gladiators, different fighting styles?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't just a random free-for-all in the arena.
Yeah.
They had very distinct classes of gladiators, each with their own specialized fighting style, their own weapons, their own armor. And these classes often reflected the fighting styles of Rome's enemies.
Okay.
So it added this kind of layer of historical and cultural significance.
Oh, that's interesting. So they were like taking inspiration from the people they had conquered and then
Exactly.
putting them in the arena.
Exactly. It was a way of, I guess, showing their dominance over these conquered peoples, even in this kind of symbolic way.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me more about these different classes. Like, what were some of the most popular ones?
One of the most famous, I think, is the Retiarius.
The Retiarius?
Yeah, the Retiarius, which means net fighter.
Okay.
He was lightly armored, and he fought with a trident and a net.
A net.
Yeah, so he would try to entangle his opponent with the net
Wow.
and then finish him off with the trident.
That sounds pretty intense.
It was a very exciting fighting style, very agile, very quick.
I bet the crowd loved that.
Oh, they ate it up.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a real spectacle.
So what kind of opponent would they usually put up against the Retiarius?
Well, often they would fight against the scutor.
The Secutor.
Yeah, which means pursuer.
Okay.
And he was a heavily armored gladiator.
Okay, so it's like the total opposite.
Yeah, exactly. So he was designed to withstand the Retiarius's attacks.
Uh-huh.
He had a large shield, a short sword, and a helmet that was very smooth and round.
Okay.
So it was hard for the Retiarius to snag it with his net.
So it's like the classic, kind of agile fighter versus the strong.
Yeah, the unstoppable force versus the immovable
Yeah.
object.
Yeah, that's really cool. Were there any other interesting kind of matchups that they would do?
Oh, tons. I mean, you had the Thracian,
Okay.
who was known for his agility and his curved sword. They would often put him up against the Murmillo, who was also heavily armored.
Okay.
And then you had the Hoplomachus, who fought with a spear and a small shield,
Wow.
kind of like a Greek hoplite warrior.
So it really is like they're taking all these different elements from all these different cultures.
Yeah, it was a real melting pot of fighting styles and weaponry.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So all this talk about fighting and weapons and armor
Yeah.
makes me wonder about the training these gladiators went through. Like, how do they actually prepare for these fights?
Well, the training was incredibly rigorous. I mean, these guys trained for years to hone their skills.
Wow.
They had to be in top physical condition.
Yeah.
They practiced with wooden swords and shields against a wooden dummy called a palos.
Okay.
And they would spar with each other under the watchful eye of their trainers.
So it sounds like they were taking this very seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't just like, messing around.
No, this was their life.
Yeah.
I mean, their success in the arena meant not only survival, but also the potential for fame and fortune.
Yeah.
So they pushed themselves to the limit.
Wow. So they really were like athletes in a way.
They were athletes. They were performers. They were warriors.
That's incredible. I mean, it really is amazing to think about, like you said, years of training to get to this point.
It was a huge commitment.
Yeah, and so then you step into the arena. I mean, what is that like?
Well, can you imagine? Picture yourself there in the Colosseum.
Yeah.
The sun beating down the air, thick with dust and the smell of sweat.
Yeah.
Thousands of people all around you.
Wow.
Screaming, cheering.
Yeah.
It must have been absolutely overwhelming.
What about pressure?
Oh, yeah. Incredible pressure.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, too, it wasn't just about fighting.
Right.
They had to perform.
Okay.
You know, they had to engage the crowd, put on a show.
So that's like a deadly ballet or something.
Yeah, exactly. A combination of athleticism and theatricality.
Wow. So did they have any say in, like, how they were going to fight? Or was it all just dictated by the Lanista?
Well, I think there was probably a bit of both.
Okay.
I mean, certainly the Lanista would have a role in determining the matchups, maybe even suggesting certain tactics. But ultimately, once the gladiator was out there in the arena, he had to make his own decisions, react to his opponent, and keep the crowd entertained.
And what about the crowd? Like, what were they looking for? I mean, were they just bloodthirsty, or was there something more to it?
I think it's probably more complex than that.
Okay.
I mean, they certainly enjoyed the violence and the excitement, but they also appreciated skill and courage.
Yeah.
And I think even a certain artistry in the fighting.
So they weren't just mindless, like you said before, just bloodthirsty. They were actually...
No, I think they were looking for something more. Yeah. They wanted to be entertained. They wanted to see a good show.
And they had their favorites. Right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like we do today with our sports heroes.
It's the same kind of thing. People had their favorite gladiators.
Wow.
They would follow their careers. They would cheer for them in the arena.
That's so interesting. So we've talked about, the origins of gladiatorial combat. We've talked about the business. We've talked about the training, the fighting the crowds. But of course, it didn't last forever.
Right.
So what happened? What led to the decline of gladiatorial combat?
Well, there were a lot of factors, I think.
Okay.
I mean, the Roman Empire itself was changing.
Yeah.
You had shifting political priorities, financial constraints.
Okay.
And then, of course, the rise of Christianity, which, with its emphasis on compassion and nonviolence, really started to turn public opinion against the brutality of the games.
So it was kind of a confluence of events then.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So the arenas eventually fell silent.
Right.
The gladiators faded into history.
They became a legend.
Yeah. Yeah. But why do you think we're still so fascinated by them today?
I think it's the combination of athleticism and skill and courage that they displayed, in the face of death.
Right.
I mean, they were warriors. They were entertainers.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think they were symbols of this human struggle against fate.
That's a really good point. So it's been a fascinating journey exploring the world of Roman gladiators.
It really has.
Debunking some myths.
Peeling back those layers.
Yeah, peeling back those layers, exactly. And just seeing the complexities of their lives and their legacy.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that there's always more to discover about the past.
I love it. Well said. Well, this has been another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the past.